former Energy Minister Gonen Segev on charges of spying on behalf of Iran. He is probably the most high-profile personality in Israel, arrested for alleged espionage on Israel's behalf of Israel's #1 enemy, Iran. But this incident, shocking as it is just the latest chapter in the long, strange saga of Gonen Segev. It's easily one of the strangest in Israeli politics. Well, joining us here in the studio is Amir Oren, political and security analyst, and Dr. Chuck Freilich, former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor and author of the newly released book, Israeli National Security, A New Strategy for an Era of Change. And Amir, let's just start with explaining to our viewers who is Gonen Segev, because even before this latest turn, he was something of a character.
That's right, because one can easily fall into the trap of asking, how have the mighty fallen? But it's the other way around. How does a person such as Gonen Segev get elected to the Knesset, becomes at 39 one of the youngest ever ministers in the Israeli cabinet, and then turns out to be a petty criminal trying to run drugs, forge his passport, and now exposed, or at least alleged, as an Iranian spy. It turns out that this medical doctor had as his neighbor in his village called Tel Adashim in the Valley of Israel, Rafael Eitan, a famous ex-general who formed a party and looked for people to fill the list. And he found this nice-looking, young, equestrian expert who is also a doctor, and made him a Knesset member.
This was in the 1990s.
This was in the 1992 elections. Then he bolted from the party. He formed his own two-man faction, joined Yitzhak Rabin's government, had the energy portfolio, served for a year or so, then was ousted when Likud came to power. But do not fear, he turned on his feet. He had some business connections, was investigated by the police because he apparently had some conflicts of interest, going back to his days of Minister of Energy, when he tried to have some business connections in the energy field, and then went to the Netherlands. When he came back, was caught trying to bring in drugs. He said it was all a mistake, then admitted it. He was convicted, sentenced for 5 years in prison. His medical license was taken from him. He went to Africa, and then the Iranian intelligence picked him up and had a relationship with him.
Dr. Freilich, isn't he the perfect kind of soft target for the Iranian intelligence spies? I mean, here's an ex-convict from Israel, probably disgruntled.
I would imagine highly disgruntled and highly unemployable in Israel. And he left the country in a state of disgrace. His medical license, as Amir was saying, was revoked, looking for something to do somewhere. But I mean, this is a very sad day for Israel, to think that a guy like this from Tel Adashim, a former soldier in an elite unit, a minister, would go and do something like this. It doesn't get worse. The traitors are the most despicable people around, and this man is the highest-ranking traitor we've ever had. I think the actual damage that he could have caused is probably quite limited. Now, quite limited doesn't mean insignificant, but most of his knowledge was clearly out of date.
But let me ask you, because you served in the government on the Security Council as energy minister, even if it was in the 1990s, did he have access to information that he could have provided that could have been of use to Iran that they didn't have before?
I would think at this point, and we're talking many years, that it's mostly information of background value, the division of labor between the different agencies and within the agencies, who does what.
The intelligence agencies.
Intelligence and other defense agencies. What are the work processes? But I would imagine, well, some of the things that he knew at the time are still in place, but the critical information would be outdated at this point. The operational information.
I beg to differ on one aspect of what Chuck has been saying. We know that Mordechai Vanunu, even after he served out his 18 years in prison, is barred from going abroad because he still carries in his head some details regarding Israel's atomic energy program. The Minister of Energy has at least some access to some of Israel's atomic energy secrets. And even if they are outdated, there are some basic facts which cannot be changed, as well as some of Israel's other energy secrets. Where did it buy from the oil that it had, even though now it is dependent on its own gas? And what is the storage capacity for the emergency and other such ideas? And more than that, had he been sitting here, even though he's an ex-con, he could have chatted up Chuck and myself. We wouldn't have suspected him because he didn't look like an Iranian agent. So the innocent people that he encountered could have been lured into giving out secrets to him.
That's another part of the allegations. It's not just what he gave up, but that he made introductions to Israelis, to former, perhaps people who served in high
because, you know, Jordana, the problem is usually, and Chuck knows it much better from his career, sometimes you have a front company or a false flag operation. Someone who would never disclose anything, even an innocent item he read in the paper, to the Iranians, if he was told that this is just a research company, this is some business intelligence operation, why don't you get $1,000 to give me a paper on that, he would have done it freely. Had they known that at the end of the line, the Iranian intelligence is waiting, no one would have touched him, and perhaps someone did talk about it.
I want to ask you, is this a failure by Israel's intelligence agencies that it didn't keep a closer tab on this man even when he was in Africa?
I tend to think that it's actually a success.
Right, that they caught him.
That they caught him. A former cabinet minister, and the Shin Bet caught him. Yes, late, but they caught him. That's the good news in this whole picture.
What's the bad news?
Well, the bad news is that a man of his background would do it. And to those of us who have been in the defense and establishment and were entrusted with sensitive information, this is a violation of a sacred trust. But, you know, I think all of this is really a bump in the road. There's an ongoing intelligence battle between Israel and Iran. We had a tremendous success a month ago. This is a partial success of theirs. The real question is where we are in the strategic confrontation today with Iran. And here I'm very concerned because President Trump pulled out of the agreement, the nuclear deal, about a month ago. And I don't see that there is either an American or an Israeli strategy in place. Pulling out of the deal isn't a strategy. That's a one-time action. Now, where do we go from here?
You were talking about the fact that you are concerned over the American president's decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal because you say that isn't a strategy.
No, that's a one-time action, and one can argue the pros and cons of that move. But the question is what comes after it. Now, the strategy is based on ramping up the sanctions against Iran. And I would like to remind our viewers that the sanctions were much greater between 2012 and 2015 when the deal was being negotiated. We had an international sanctions regime in place. It was enough to bring the Iranians to the table. It wasn't enough at the time to get them to cave in. Prime Minister Netanyahu says that had they stayed in place some longer, they might have caved in. But I think it's really unlikely that it's going to get them to do now what they were unwilling to do at the time. Now, in another few weeks, a month or two, the Iranians are going to find out that the Europeans, despite their protestations to the contrary, are going to have to play along with the American sanctions. And at that point, I think the Iranians are probably going to, they won't disavow the agreement. They won't pull out because they have too much at stake. What they'll probably do is begin slowly disengaging. In other words, they will make small, limited violations, not enough to bring the world down on them. And then the question is, what do we do? Because we've already used up our diplomatic and economic sticks. And both the United States and Israel are going to be left with one option. That is either to go the military route or not go the military route. I don't see that President Trump is willing to do that, and I'm not convinced that the state of Israel wants to do that.
Right. Amir, just to get back to Segev for a minute, I'm hearing that on Iranian social media, we're already calls in Parsi for free Gonen Segev. Whatever the substantial damage, substantive or otherwise, this is a propaganda victory, is it not, for the Iranians?
No, not at all. It's a propaganda victory for Israel and for the Israeli intelligence services, because the damage he could have done was minimal, while Israel wisely waited until he met with Iranian officials in Tehran. Now Israel knows who these people are. Israel knows a lot about Iran. What the Iranians should do when, as they say in the intelligence business, when they walk back the cat, when they try to see what happened here, they will know that Israel was on the tail for a long time. And they are penetrated, they are exposed to Israel and the other intelligence coups that Israel had were to prove it. So the Iranians must ask themselves, how come the Israelis know so much about us? And as for Gonen Segev, if you look at the Rogues Gallery of former Israeli ministers and even one president who either went to prison or were convicted.
And prime ministers, too.
Yes, no. So you have a prime minister, a minister of treasury or finance, you have a minister of the interior, you have a minister of justice who stayed out of prison, you have a lot of people. If you look at that, Gonen Segev is a minor figure, almost to the right of the picture.
Chuck, do you think that the Israelis will try to get information from Segev about his Iranian contacts?
Well, I think that's par for the course. Of course we will, and I think we'll get some useful information. But I still think that this is a great day for the Iranians and a very sad day for us. They did manage to recruit a former Israeli minister, yes, a crook, a convicted crook, a man who had been totally disgraced. But this is about as good as it gets in the intelligence world.
All right, well, certainly we're going to be talking a lot more about it, and probably with
a future minister would have been even better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Let's not give them any ideas.